This is Conversations with Women in Sales, an award-winning podcast created by Barbara Giamanco, who hosted the first 67 episodes. Listen to interviews with amazing women about their journeys in their sales careers, often discussing sales leadership tips, ideas, and strategies. We aim to inspire women to consider a sales career and for some women to grow into sales leadership. Men, we appreciate your allyship. And now, your host, Lori Richardson.
A big thank you to our sponsor, Skillibrium, for their support of this podcast. Leave subjectivity aside with Skillibrium, where talent meets excellence and innovation to build the next generation of human-centric sales leaders and high-performing teams. I'm here this morning with Misky Sharif, and Miski is an account executive with Revolut, which is a fintech company, financial services, based in London. So, Miski, welcome. It's so great to have you here today on our podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Laurie. I'm glad it's the morning over there and the afternoon over here.
Exactly.
He's wrapping up over here.
Yeah, I originally saw you on a panel that our friends at Making Moves held a while back. Making Moves, for people that aren't aware, they're a great UK-based women in sales community, and they do some wonderful things. They put out a big gala every year, and they do virtual events, which anyone can follow. You don't need to be there. And after you and I talked, I was really glad that I had reached out because you had a really interesting story. You told me a little bit about your background. I thought we would talk about that, plus just the state of being a woman in sales and your perspective in the UK. So does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
That's great. So tell us how you got into sales and what you were thinking when you first started in sales. And you had a tough background growing up, right?
Yeah, my parents are refugees. My mother fled the war in Somalia, we're Somalian, and came to the UK as refugees, barely speaking any English. My mother came actually in March and had never seen snow before in her life, obviously. So didn't wear a jacket, was completely bewildered by what snow was. And yeah, there was a lot of adjusting period, especially the area in which they first moved to. There was the EDL, which is the English Defence League, and they actually were quite racist and abusive towards my parents when they first moved to the area. It was really rough growing up. We didn't have a lot of money. My mother, when she was healthy, was a cleaner. And yeah, life was tough. We didn't have a lot of money growing up. The area that we lived in was quite crime-riddled. I remember watching someone get stabbed in front of the Iceland, which is a very cheap supermarket. Whatever your equivalent is in America, it's where you can get cheap food. And it was just really rough. And I was always coming up with some sort of plan to get out of that area.
Drug deals going on and all sorts of things happening around you, right?
Absolutely. There was a lot of drug dealers and a lot of drug users as well.
So tough.
Yeah, so really tough. But I knew not to ever touch alcohol or drugs because of that environment, which is, I guess, a good life lesson. But I just wanted to get out. And the only people that I saw driving nice cars were the drug dealers. And I used to love gangster movies like Goodfellas. Those are the kind of movies I grew up watching. And I realized that ultimately what those drug dealers had is they had great sales experience. What they were doing was selling a product. So I got into selling chocolates and sweets to the local area, and at school I would buy it wholesale. There was like a cash and carry. And I would take it to school, and it was like a multi-pack because I don't sell separately. I would split up the multi-pack and I would sell it at school. But my mother found my piggy bank. She was like, "What are you doing? What on earth are you selling?" I was like, "Listen, I've got a little side business. You've got to trust me. I'm making enough money for us to get out of here." So yeah, I would sell anything. I'd go to the car boot sales on Saturdays and I would try to find anything that I could swap and sell. I would sell SIM cards, showing my age, but it was a time where you buy SIM cards. Yeah, so I would get them online really cheap, or sometimes I would, like an O2, which is like it's a SIM card carrier over here in London.
Okay.
They would have these trials, or they would send it to you for free. And I would send it to older guys who hadn't figured out what the internet was. And I would sell it to them for £5. And I remember going to the market. I must have been no older than 10. And I was selling these SIM cards to older men. And my mother comes out of nowhere and she sees me. And obviously the visual was these guys were buying SIM cards from me. There could have been a dangerous situation for me, but all I could think of in my head was how to make money to get out of the situation that I'm in.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I grew up, when I was 17, I got a job at a telemarketing company called TNS, and it was performance based. The more people you could get to do your surveys, you would get a bonus. So my job was just to get to the top of that list, get as many bonuses as I could. So they would pay us £7 an hour, but you would get a £5 bonus on top of that. If you hit the quota of the certain amount of surveys, you could do an hour. And I was just like, yeah, my hourly went to £35 an hour because of the amount of bonuses I could get. So I went from £7 to £5 and I was like, and I realized that you can maximize the amount of money you can make if it's performance based.
Yeah.
Because no one asks you what your background is, what degree you have, any of that. It's, can you do the job? And can you show us the results? And that's what I love about sales. It's numbers driven. You can't hide behind it. You can't say my dad is this, my mum, because I don't have a name or anything to rely on.
Yeah, I was the same in that way, in that no one in a corner office could say, well, we don't know about her. I'm hitting my numbers and I'm exceeding my numbers. And what do you want to say about that? I loved the fact of that. In my early 20s, I loved the fact that I could show my value by my work and my performance. It's not just working hard, which I think a lot of us did. It sounds like you worked very hard, but it's not about working hard. It's really about working smart, and it's about production, about getting results. So sometimes you have to be really creative, and clearly you grew up that way. You grew up learning how to be creative in all sorts of different ways. And for me, it was a lemonade stand on a dead end street. So I had to really get out there and get my messaging out in advance. But yeah, we were enterprising, and that's very good. And that's what you need in sales, right? You need to be entrepreneurial.
Yeah. And I think tough circumstances allow you to flourish if you don't let it break you. That is,
Right.
that's the flip side of it, right? I mean, certain amounts of trauma can actually break a human being. But I think I've used it as my rocket fuel.
Yeah.
It's definitely the chip on my shoulder. And yeah, because for a long time, I was just like, well, I wish my parents had me. There would seem to be no plan. There seemed to be no structure. It was just, yeah, there was definitely a lack of resources for us when we were growing up, but you had to make do with what you could. But I think that kind of circumstances allowed me to put myself in a position where I'm in now, maximizing the amount of income I make. I'm also much more a risk taker. I accept a lot of things. Like my friend had those tickets to the Paralympic Games. I was like, yes, let's do it. Let's go to Paris.
So wonderful.
Yeah. So you definitely accept a lot more risk because risk taking is the only way out of those kind of tough circumstances.
Yeah. And I imagine in fintech, it's a male majority sales environment. How do you stay motivated and dealing with the fact that you probably it can be like a boys club at times? I'm not sure if that is your experience or not, but how do you stay motivated for who you are and what you're bringing and your maybe different approach in some cases?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. I'm the only woman on my team. And in our sales team globally, it's only about 20% women. So there's not a lot of us. And we're quite a large sales team. It's about 700 of us globally. But the way I stay motivated is my mentor, her quote would always be teach one, each one, teach one. So I feel like being in the position that I'm in, I'm able to turn around and teach others. There's been so many women who have come to me and asked me for help in getting into sales or getting into sales at my company. And I've been able to be that person to give them that information. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I was put off by the fact that there is such a lack of women in sales, especially in fintech. Finance in general is very male dominated.
Yeah.
We need to join those spaces. And I think we shouldn't be deterred of the boys club. I'm not trying to join the boys club. I'm not trying to be anything that I'm not. I'm here to do my job. And that's it at the end of the day. And if I'm able to be that representation for other women who say, maybe I shouldn't be there, they can see me and see people like you, Laurie, and see the other women in sales and say, maybe I can. And that's all they need. I think Oprah said, if you see someone, one person that looks like you, it's possible. So they just need that. They just need that face that tells them it's possible. And that we are, even just by existing.
Yeah. I use the hashtag see it, be it a lot in this podcast series. So yeah, once you see and the whole point of the podcast is to normalize the fact that there's some amazing women in sales roles. Sales is an admirable profession, and we need more women in leadership positions because women tend to hire more women. And ultimately, I'd love to see more women in sales, starting in sales and then growing through up the chain into leadership, because not everyone wants to be in leadership. And I was an individual contributor for most of my career because I just wanted to be responsible for myself. I was already a young single mom, and I didn't want to have a team of people that my results depended on their success and not just mine. So I kept it pretty easy, but I see a real need for more women in leadership because women make really great leaders, and sales definitely needs that. Is that anything you aspire to someday, or have you thought much about that?
Yes, I want to set up my own business. Fintech, wealth tech, those are spaces that really interest me. I used to work at a bank, and it was really interesting to see how much of our financial decisions were emotionally driven. And I think it's just an interesting subject to delve into. Yeah, I don't know exactly quite what, but I know I'm going to run a business in that industry.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. But all the things you're learning in sales, that's the hardest thing. When people eventually become entrepreneurs, many people don't know how to sell, and they have to be their first salesperson. And so that's another thing I talk about with the sales career. You can do whatever you want from here on out because you have that foundation. You knew how to sell before you started working for them because of how you grew up. So that's really exciting. You'll always have those skills and you can impart that on other people. Another thing I wanted to mention was that on the Making Moves event that you were on, they created a piece of content that it said that you were talking about overcoming imposter syndrome, and you had 3 pieces of advice. And one was have an accomplishment bank, which I'll ask you about in a minute, have a confidence mindset, and then have a support network. So tell us what an accomplishment bank is. I think I call it something different, but I love the idea.
Yeah, it's a bank of all the great things you've done in your career that when you have a lull in motivation, you can always refer back to. Because the thing about sales is it's very cyclical, and you can have a dip in a quarter and then you forget how awesome you are. And what that accomplishment bank is, it could be a Slack message from your manager telling you did a good job. It could be an email from a client thanking you for your help on a project. It could be whatever, but you just add it, whatever makes you feel good about your accomplishments at work, you add it to that bank and you refer back to it whenever you need it. So
Yeah.
you don't need another person to be your cheerleader or somebody else to remind you or her. You've got that accomplishment bank that tells you and reminds you this is the awesome things you've done.
Yeah. That phrase, I am her. Yeah, that's surfaced. I love that. Yeah. And it's also good when it comes time for a negotiation or a new promotion or a new role to have all that to fall back on. Cause I find I forget the things I did. I don't know about you, but the older you get, the more it'll happen. And just being able to go, oh, I forgot that I had spoken on this event or I did this other thing. And it helps build your confidence and your brand, and it just helps you. It helps the company that you're working at because you're bringing a better self because of all these things that you've done to really build yourself up. So I love
Absolutely.
that. I love that. And then confidence mindset, obviously, right? Ha-
Yeah, I think mindset is everything. At my previous job, we had a Sonder trainer, so a Sonder coach, and he was basically trying to help us with our mindset before you pick up a phone. and you try to do a cold call, if you already think it's going to go horrible,
It
it's
will.
probably horrible. Exactly.
Right.
So everything starts with your mindset. If you believe, you can achieve. I know it sounds really cliche and cheesy, but it's true. When you pick up the phone and you smile and you dial, people can feel that tone. It translates, energy translates. So I think truly believing in yourself to the point of delusion, if need be, until you start seeing those accomplishments, I think it's so very necessary, especially in the beginning of your career when you don't have an accomplishment bank because you're very new. You need to really believe in yourself.
Yeah. And then have a community around you, and you belong to Making Moves. We love them. They're a really great community, and anyone can join. They don't need to be in the UK. And
Yeah.
but you've done some in-person events with them. And sometimes you have to get out of your company, especially if you're a woman and there aren't a lot of other women in your role. You go meet people outside of it. We have so many virtual options now that I think is great. But I really like what they're doing at Making Moves. So shout out to them.
Yeah, no, they're absolutely awesome. And they give people opportunities as well. I'd done a in-person panel discussion before, but that was my first webinar. And it was because I was an active member. They were like, hey, would you like to speak on this? Absolutely. I'm traveling in Ethiopia right now, but when I'm back, I definitely would love to participate. So I think it's great to have community. I think without community, it's hard to flourish. You need people to go along with you on this journey. Sales is very hard. It's hard on the psyche. It's hard mentally. You need a community to sustain your career. And I think without community, it explains why a lot of women actually drop out of sales. It's easy to get down by working at a company that fires you after you hit a bad quarter, or the tech layoffs that are happening right now in the market. Without community cheering you on, telling you to stay, it's easier to leave and find a more comfortable job. Speaking from my own experience, I had worked in sales and then I had a few really sad personal situations. There was death in the family, illness. So I actually left sales and went into customer service because it was remote. Before the pandemic, I actually found it quite hard to find remote sales jobs.
Yes.
The pandemic really shifted everything.
Totally.
Most of my sales jobs were 9 to 5 in the office. So I needed a remote job during the pandemic. So I moved into customer service, just a customer service job. When the pandemic eased up, I went back to working in the office and I really wasn't motivated and I felt like I needed a community. I needed something. So I found this community called Trainio. And their whole thing was to train people to get into tech sales. And I'd had a sales background, but at the time I was working at a media company. So I was selling advertisement sales. You want to advertise on a newspaper, come do it with us, TV slots, all that kind of stuff. So I really wanted to move into tech sales because I heard through the grapevine that's where the money was.
Yeah.
So I wanted to move into tech sales and I did this training course. It was for 2 months. It was Monday to Friday, right after work. And I dedicated 8 weeks of my life to that course. And then I got into my first tech company. It was an American tech company. So that was an eye opener. See how you Americans deal with. Yeah, it was really an eye opener. I would say in the UK and Europe in general, we have a lot more protection for colleagues and employee rights.
Yeah. I wish we did here. I really did. Because there's some terrible things that have happened with people losing their jobs and being blindsided, not knowing what's going on. And it's just, hey, it's the way it is.
Yeah, because it's hire at will, right? I think that's the term.
Yeah.
So one of my colleagues, he was in a morning meeting with us and everyone was asking him how his weekend was going. And then the meeting next was with HR and he was fired on the spot. Yeah, that was an introduction to how Americans do
Welcome
business.
to America.
Exactly.
And all your files are locked. Anything that you have is personal. People learn the hard way. If you feel like something might be coming up, you need to plan ahead. And also our friend Dan Goodman, I don't know if you follow him, but he is a great guy that advocates on behalf of people who have been wrongly let go or they've gotten really bad parting offers to be gone. and he helps them negotiate. He provides a really great service. He's been on a past episode talking about some of the different things. He's helped women who were fired when they were pregnant, all sorts of things where we're not protected here in the US. But I hope that it becomes more like the protections that you have.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's an interesting whole nother topic. But you had a book that you had mentioned, I believe, did you? In terms of a recommendation for people. I usually ask people for a book or a pod that they might recommend.
Yeah, it's called Warrior Woman. It's 3,000 Years of Women in War. It's an amazing book. I've just started reading it. I think it's really great to learn about women who came before you and the awesome things that they did.
Yeah.
I think if I could go to a quote that is popping in my head, it's when you reach the top, make sure to send the elevator back down. Yeah, I think it's awesome to hear women who've come before you've done amazing things. As I said, you've got to see it to be it, as the quote that you said earlier. I think growing up in the UK, we've got a history of having women who are leaders. We've had three female heads of states. So we've had three female prime ministers in the UK. And I think it's important to educate women on the awesome things that women who have come before have done, whether that's the rights movement, how we have rights, because we've had such a seismic shift in the way women are treated in society. And this is all relatively new. This is your generation and our grandparents' generation. In this country, it wasn't until the 70s where women couldn't open bank accounts without the approval of a man. There's so many things that have only recently changed in the eyes of the law for us. So I think it's important to keep in memory the awesome things that women who've come before us have done, and for us to keep believing and dreaming.
Yeah. And the book you're talking about, we were always told women were hunters and gatherers. And yet there's a whole series of stories, and there were areas where women were warriors. And that's really exciting for us to know that we can be leaders. We should be leaders. And the whole story of, we should be second to the men who are the hunters out there, that's just not, that wasn't always the case. So it's good to know that.
It's good to know that. And it's also, we should never let those true stories get lost to history. I didn't even know that there was like Somalian queens or queens from Africa. And then my grandma was like, sit down, I need to give you an education. And I think that was very important for her to pass that knowledge and wisdom down to me, because it would be lost in time. So we have done awesome, amazing things. We're not relegated just to kitchen or to being stay-at-home housewives. If that's what we want to do, we can do that, absolutely. But we have achieved and done amazing things. So I think reading that book has just been a great eye-opener, because historians haven't always been kind in remembering the stories of women in history.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a pleasure to have you on, Miski. And can people connect with you on LinkedIn if they so are interested to do?
Yeah, absolutely. It's Misky Sharif. The good thing about having a unique name is there's not many Miskis in the world. So if you type in, I'm probably the first one that pops up.
You're going to pop up. That's great. Thank you so much. We wish you continued success, and I'll be watching to see how things grow for you over the years. So thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Laura.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Conversations with Women in Sales. You can find all of our episodes at womensalespros.com/podcast. Help us spread the word, and let's change the face of B2B sales.